It was a Tuesday on the 29th floor, looking beautifully over Manhattan when I got mad. It was a normal meeting during a normal day of a normal, very hectic week. I was meeting with Matan Griffel, a very bright young man I had met a few months earlier. And Matan was talking about his experience teaching himself to code and designing a class to teach other young entrepreneurs how to code. And something snapped. Why is it that only entrepreneurs and only young people are assumed to want to code? I manage a strategic portfolio of projects at Bloomberg that range from new products to sales, marketing to human resources, finance to media. So why is it my boss looks at me and says, "You're not able to have those strategic discussions with the technology people, are you?" Why is it I feel it in my stomach sometimes when I get a problem with my computer? So I challenged Matan to teach me to code. But the last time I coded was in BASIC, with those little green tapes that you wrapped up in a rubber band, with my mom driving me to school at 5 in the morning to have some time on the machine. I am the definition of a digital immigrant. I'm also a mother, a supercommuter, a former banker, and an executive, and my schedule does not allow me to sign up for regular bi-weekly classes downtown. So Matan and I set up time once or twice a week for an hour. Matan gave me homework, which I often, not always, did. Occasionally, I would get frustrated, drop from view, or I would throw up my hands and say, "I have no idea what you just said." However, we've done pretty well over these past few months. I have learned that coding, that this expression, "just build a prototype," actually means having some command of 5 languages: Ruby, Ruby on Rails, HTML5, CSS, even some Unix, as well as requiring a developed sense of aesthetic and the ability to structure and solve problems. I have found coding unbelievably unforgiving of mistakes in grammar or punctuation and requires a level of concentration that is a bit tough to fit into the 15-minute slots of my day. And I have found coding delivers an amazing joy of accomplishment. At first, I was sort of shy about talking about this. I didn't tell the people on my team, didn't tell my husband, didn't tell the people I worked with. I really didn't tell many people, period. I wasn't quite sure why I was doing this or how it was going to turn out. And then something interesting happened. I met an old friend over a drink to talk about the future of news. And I mentioned that I was learning to code. I thought he was going to fall off his chair. I emailed a dear friend from Switzerland. He was genuinely shocked and surprised. I mentioned it to my boss, the chief content officer, the CEO. They smiled and nodded. Why was that? Why was it so unusual to learn to code? Or was it just about me learning to code? So I started asking people, college kids, senior executives, doctors, musicians, lawyers, in startups, at universities, interview candidates. I started with the assumption that it was a generational thing between the people who did and did not think it was important to code. I was wrong. Yes, there were some older executives I met, and even a tenured professor of computer science at Harvard who said it was a waste of my time, or who asked if I didn't have access to tech support. I do, and they're terrific. No. And then there was one VC who said, "We are the last generation of VCs who don't know how to code." But the surprise came at the other end of the age spectrum. I was talking with a student at Stanford Business School, asked him about his classmates, how many are interested or do know how to code. And his answer was very, very few. Dinner with students at Harvard Business School yielded the same answer, 1 to 2%. And why would they bother? So why was it that when I sat down across from a 25-year-old who just finished his MBA, he said, "No, I never learned to code. Of course, I do know how to manage a technology team. Not quite sure why I never found somebody to build out my business idea." Seriously? What tier 1 programmer was going to work for him? Why was it when I talked to a 25-year-old scientist about coding, they were all over it? Because of the power it gave them to work with data. Why aren't these MBAs more interested in coding? They take basic classes in finance. Everyone knows you can't advance your career if you don't know the difference between an account payable and account receivable. I was fascinated. Young future business leaders are not learning to code. They're not interested. They don't see it as relevant. They don't have a sense of urgency about it. But what about me? Was it relevant for me? Learning to code meant when I was backing up my MacBook Air, trying to upgrade to Mountain Lion, and all of a sudden 50 gigabytes of files disappeared, I knew what to do. I Googled hidden files, I got a line of code, I put it in the terminal, and voila, my files appeared. Learning to code means that I understand the jokes and illusions that I see or read. RSS is like Git without GitHub. Learning to code, when I walk into a meeting with a senior business guy, and he says it's going to take his team 150 days to build out what I'm looking for. I can be skeptical. I ask a developer, and I can discover there's another way to solve the problem that takes 5 days. My experience and this journey to learn to code led me to a pretty simple conclusion. In tomorrow's business, in the professional world of tomorrow, you have to know two things. You have to know the basics of business and the basics of coding. Without both, you are taking an enormous risk. And if you start from the technology side, you have a tremendous advantage. Coding is becoming the basis of the world around us. It is invisible and yet determinate. So take the time, take the risk, learn to code. There are great places to start. Try Code Academy, try Coursera. And finally, just to show off, here's what I made. Because coding for me meant that I was able to work to solve a problem. I was really frustrated that we do terrific investigative reporting, but nobody knows about it. It goes unnoticed. So I built a nice reader for long-form articles selected by Jed Sandberg, our web editor. For those who are interested, I'm MS Kish at GitHub, and please take a look at my code and comment on it. What is GitHub, you ask? Well, if you have to ask, then maybe you need to learn to code. Thank you.